What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and last year, drafting the wide receiver 1 overall was the biggest advantage in fantasy football because simply by rostering Ja'Marr Chase, you had a 71.6% chance of making the playoffs, the highest rate across the entire ESPN player pool. Now, drafting the wide receiver 1 overall is easier said than done because if you drafted Tyreek Hill or CeeDee Lamb in the first round, your team likely struggled. But if you drafted Ja'Marr Chase in the first round, he was a legitimate league winner despite being a first-round pick. He carried those teams that drafted him. Now, this year, by consensus, there are 7 wide receivers going in the first round, so it is as important as ever to choose carefully when you are selecting a wide receiver, but this would be a boring video to only talk about the first-round wide receivers. Ja'Marr Chase last year was the only wide receiver to hit 20-plus points per game, but since 2020, there are about 2 to 3 20-plus point per game wide receivers in a given season on average. And not only are 20-plus point per game wide receivers powerful, increasing your win rate from an expected 8.3% to 1.5xing to 3xing that number all the way to Cooper Kupp in 2021, giving you a 31.1% win rate, but you can find them much deeper in your draft than running backs, right? When you look at the 20-plus point per game scorers since 2020, you can see with running backs, 10 of them were drafted in round 1, 1 in round 2, and then they are not to be heard of after that. But with wide receivers, you have 5 in round 1, 4 in round 2, and then in round 4, 5, 6, 7, we've seen league winners come from that range of the draft with guys like Keenan Allen in 2023, Cooper Kupp in 2021, Stephon Diggs in 2020, Deebo Samuel in 2021. In that range. So today we're not only going to find who has the best chance to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall in the first couple of rounds, but also some sneaky candidates with 20-plus point per game upside in those middle rounds of your draft. As always, we put a lot of research into these videos. This video is going to have a ton of spreadsheets and a ton of data. All I ask that if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and let's get right into the video. Now, to find the future 20-plus point per game seasons at wide receiver, we have to look into the past. So I pulled the last 30 times a wide receiver has finished with 20-plus points per game, giving us data all the way back to 2014. I have it sorted by points per game and then the season, so Ja'Marr Chase, and you have all the 2023 guys, the 2022, so on and so forth, all the way back to 2014. Across the board, I found out how old they were, what year of their career they did it, where they went in drafts, among wide receivers, their previous production, the volume they had in this given year, their efficiency, their team environment, which then gives us a checklist to find out who is going to be this year's 20-plus point per game scorer. And this is how I have it broken down. All of these apply to 96.7% or higher of the 30 wide receiver sample. First, you have the category of age. This wide receiver should be within their first 11 years of their career, with year 3 to 8 being the sweet spot. And the reason I say year 3 to 8, it's self-explanatory, like that is the prime of a wide receiver's career. But when we look at 20-plus point per game seasons for wide receivers year after year after year, years 3 to 8 of a wide receiver's career, that is where most of these take place. So we want to be putting an emphasis on wide receivers in years 3 through 8. Then we have production. Did you score 16-plus points per game in one of the previous 2 years of your career? Because oftentimes we see bounce backs, right, where a guy has a down year and then bounces back to what he did 2 years prior. So 2 years feels about right? If you have like an injury down year, you can still fall back on what you did 2 years ago. And then also, if you don't have a 16-plus point per game season through the last 2 years, you're probably early on in your career, right? If you are heading into year 3 and you didn't hit 16-plus points per game in year 1 or 2, that's not a big deal because you are still ascending as a talent. After that, in terms of volume, we're looking for 10-plus opportunities per game, so that's targets plus carries. And if you're not getting volume, you need to have touchdown upside. So we have 10-plus opportunities per game, but if you can't hit that, if you're in a top 6 scoring offense, that applies to 100% of the sample. Moving on from that, now we get into the 96.7% range, which is still, that's 29 of 30. You're a top 30 wide receiver by ADP. The only wide receiver to not be top 30, I believe, was Deebo Samuel as wide receiver 33. Efficiency, you have 2+ yards per out run in one of the previous 2 years, similar to the production. Did you hit 2+ yards per out run in terms of efficiency? That's just your literally yards per out run. Were you efficient? Were you making plays on the field independent of all other variables in one of the previous 2 years? Did you pop in terms of yards per out run? And then environment. Are you in a top 15 scoring offense? Ideally, If you're going to hit 20 plus points per game, you're going to be in a good offense. But if you're not in a good offense, you need to be in a high volume offense. So if you didn't hit top 15 scoring offense, you had to be in a top 10 pass attempts offense. And that hit 96.7% of the sample. I think the only one that didn't was DeAndre Hopkins back in like the weird year where I think that he had, I'm trying to think through it. It might have been like Yates. I don't know. DeAndre Hopkins had a year where he hit 20 plus points per game with brutal quarterback play. Now, we take everything we just learned. We take the data, the checklist, and now we apply it to the 2025 wide receivers. We are going to go 30 wide receivers deep here through the first rounds of consensus ADP. And here is the first round. Now, before we even talk about the players or the targets or who I think is going to hit 20 plus points per game this season, let's kind of break down what we're looking at, okay? First, we have the checklist on the far left. We also have Mike Clay's projections doing the lifting for 10 plus opportunities per game. We have Vegas scoring projections doing the lifting for top 15 scoring offense. We also have Mike Clay's projections factoring in the top 10 in pass attempts along with the top 6 scoring offense so that we can have, the what do you want to call it? The qualifier of, okay, if you don't hit 10 plus opportunities per game, you should have a Vegas scoring offense of top 6. If you're not hitting a top 15 scoring offense, then Mike Clay should have you projected for top 10 in pass attempts on your team. Then across the board, I applied that to every wide receiver. If you hit the mark, you get a green. If you come just short, right? So at the end there, you can see Nico Collins gets a yellow for top 15 scoring offense. 17th in terms of scoring offense is right there. So he gets a yellow. And then across the bottom, you get a simple total. That's just how many things are you checking off in terms of the checklist. You get 1 point for a green, 0.5 for a yellow, and then 0 for a white, right? So Ja'Marr Chase hits all 6. He gets a 6. Nico Collins hits 1, 2, white's a 0, 3, 4, 0.5 for the 17, so he gets 4.5, and that gives us kind of a checklist total for each and every single player. Now, my overall thoughts on the first round is these guys are first-round picks for a reason, right? I'm not going to tell you, go draft Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Those 3 guys are all very much worthy of being top 6 overall picks. They all have 20-plus point per game upside. I will say this should quiet some of the concerns. I have seen the sentiment that, oh, well, J.J. McCarthy and a run-first offense on the Vikings might hurt Justin Jefferson. He's still Justin Jefferson. He hits everything we're looking for. And Mike Clay has them projected for top 10 in pass attempts despite Vegas not having them top 15 in scoring. So I'm not worried about Jefferson at all. Now, in terms of the targets here and guys that I like, first, what sticks out to me immediately is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's been kind of slept on this entire offseason as kind of an afterthought. At the 1-2 turn, we've seen him before. This is somebody going into year 5 of his career. He's hit 20.7 points per game as recently as 2023. He's in a top 6 scoring offense. He's projected for 9.2 opportunities per game, so he's getting high volume in a high-scoring offense. He hit 2.63 yards per out run in one of the last 2 years. He's honestly a monster. And this sort of sticks out to me as maybe I've been sleeping on him, some of the new young toys of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and you want to put those guys ahead. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, if we looked up and he finishes like the wide receiver 2 overall with a 20-plus point per game season, it wouldn't shock me at all. After Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think this also kind of solidifies why I love Puka Nacua so much. I understand the Matthew Stafford concerns. They're very much real. But if Matthew Stafford plays a full 17 games, if Puka Nacua is healthy, he has wide receiver 1 overall written all over him. 3.56 yards per out run last year is the highest on this entire list. He's already hit 18-plus points per game in a previous season. He is already projected for 10-plus opportunities despite being next to Devontae Adams. It's a good offense. Again, it just comes down to the health of Puka and Stafford. But at the 1-2 turn, I think that he is a amazing pick. And then I'm making the exception for Nico Collins here. You guys know he's my guy. I know that he hits 4.5 on this list, the lowest total, but he is a 1-2 turn pick. He will fall to the second sometimes, and I'm also just kind of making the exception and kind of waving off the data here. Nico, to me, he is right there, right? 8.4 opportunities per game isn't enough volume in terms of projections. I do think that he can take that next step into a whole other gear and challenge for 10-plus opportunities per game. He's on the 17th projected scoring offense, so he just misses it. And then 13th in pass attempts by Mike Clay, just misses the top 10 in pass attempts. But I do think he has another gear we still haven't seen yet. Over his last 10 games with 80% plus of the routes, he's at 19.4 points per game. So just just below that 20-plus point per game threshold. I think that he is right there. 3.1 yards per out run last year tells me that he has that next gear still in his tank, and I do believe Nico Collins can take a step forward. And I do like this Texans offense more than a guy like Mike Clay or like Vegas. I think that they take a big step forward this year. CJ Stroud bounces back, and there's not a lot of target competition around him. Sure, there's a lot of names, but there isn't a T. Higgins or a Jalen Waddle or a Devontae Smith, like a legit number 2 wide receiver. There's just like Christian Kirk and some rookies and Dalton Schultz. So to me, I think the sky is the limit for Nico Collins. Moving on, let's talk about the second round here. And there's only 4 wide receivers in this range in terms of home leagues. People are hammering, Bowers, McBride, maybe a quarterback or 2 is going in a home league. Of course, running backs are flying off the board here. And to me, all of these profiles are solid. I'm not going to call any of these guys a fade. I will say, of this list, the guy I'm drafting the least of is Drake London, just because his environment is shaky, right? We're talking 22nd in terms of scoring offense. Mike Clay has them outside the top 20 in projected pass attempts, but if Michael Penix does take a step forward as a quarterback, he could absolutely bury me and get Drake London to 10-plus opportunities per game in a good offense. So he's very much a fine pick in round 2. I'm just sort of splitting hairs here. Now, the 2 guys I really like in this range, one of them being Brian Thomas Jr. He hits every threshold. He's close to 10-plus opportunities per game with 9.1. He gets a yellow there, but he had 16.7 points per game last year. He didn't even need like the first 3 years in parentheses. The scoring offense is 20th. It's not quite top 15, but Mike Clay does have these guys top 10 in pass attempts. Last year as a rookie, 2.45 yards per out run. When you put that next to his peers on the Jaguars last year, all other Jaguars wide receivers had 1.06 yards per out run. He was a monster despite 7 games of Mac Jones with the 9th best rookie point per game season ever. And he steps into a much better situation this year, a year 2 jump candidate. I could see him having one of these monster 20-plus point per game seasons, but I do understand and concede that what we talked about the sweet spot, right? Years 3 through 8. It wouldn't shock me if Brian Thomas Jr. went to like 18, 19 points per game this year, and then year 3, 4, 5 is when we truly saw a massive breakout. But because he already hit 16 points per game in the past, I do think he can just step right into 20-plus points per game in year 2. And honestly, this exercise is giving me the confidence that if you want to pull up Brian Thomas Jr. into round 1, if you want to even put him ahead of guys like Malik Neighbors or Nico Collins, you absolutely can. Brian Thomas Jr. to me is the real deal. And then we'll talk about A.J. Brown. I get why you might say he doesn't have 20-plus point per game upside. 8.4 opportunities per game isn't going to do it. The Philadelphia Eagles passing offense isn't going to do it, but he does hit the qualifiers of if you're not going to have 10-plus opportunities per game, he is in a top 6 scoring offense. There's going to be plenty of touchdowns. He's a very good player. And I just refuse to believe that when we look back at A.J. Brown's career, that he doesn't have one of these 20-plus point per game seasons. I have a stat here. Justin Jefferson was the wide receiver 5 last year in yards per out run with 2.5. If A.J. Brown ever had a season with less than 2.5 yards per out run, it would be his lowest ever. So his standard is what Justin Jefferson did last year in terms of yards per out run. He's that good. He's in year 7. He's coming towards the end of that sweet spot. I do think if a 20-plus point per game season is going to happen for A.J. Brown, it's going to be this year or next year. I know that, again, the Eagles, it's a tough sell, right? Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts tush pushes, a really good defense, but he has a couple of outs, right? Whether that's defenses focusing in on Saquon in the run game and forcing them to pass in the red zone, or a Saquon injury or a Devontae Smith injury, or this defense takes a step back. There's a couple of different ways to get some wiggle room, but again, I do think all it would take is just a touchdown spike season for A.J. Brown, kind of like what Mclaurin had last year where he just scored 13 touchdowns out of nowhere. If A.J. Brown ever scored 13 touchdowns out of nowhere, he would challenge for wide receiver 1 overall. And then I'll also say Ladd McConkey is a great pick here. The only thing he doesn't hit is 10-plus opportunities per game, but it wouldn't be shocking to see him get there. I do think Keenan Allen being there now kind of puts a little bit of a damper on that target ceiling. I think Ladd is more of a guy that's going to challenge for 18-plus points per game in the second round of your drafts. Then we can talk about the third rounds here. And this is a weird area. First, you have T. Higgins, who hits a lot of things, right? He hits a 5 in terms of his simple total. He's a fine floor play, but I find it tough for him to hit 20-plus points per game without a Jamar Chase injury. A lot of these second fiddle guys, unless if it's like neck and neck, because it is interesting to see Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 2 off the boards in his own offense when he popped in 2021, I believe. It was him and Robert Woods. Robert Woods was just ahead, but it's not like Robert Woods is going 101 in fantasy drafts. You know what I mean? So I find it very tough to sell myself on a T. Higgins or a Devontae Smith when the one is so established. So to me, I think 20-plus points per game is out of range for T. Higgins. But again, last year he was at 18-plus, and that's absolutely fine in the third round. Now, I will say the rest of this range I don't love. We'll talk about Tyreek Hill in a second. To me, JSN and Garrett Wilson are brutal picks in the third round. Garrett Wilson in particular, we're now in year 4. He hasn't hit 16-plus points per game. He's not going to get the opportunity of 10-plus points per game. He hasn't hit 2-plus yards per out run in either of his last 2 years. This Jets offense is brutal. So Garrett Wilson to me in the third round is a really tough pick. And then you have JSN, who I don't really believe in that much either. Only 1.81 yards per run in each of his last 2 years in terms of a high number in his last 2 years. So he hasn't really shown monster efficiency. Maybe he hits 16, 17, 18 points per game, but it's not a massive hit. And I would just honestly rather be taking the quarterbacks and running backs in this range. When we go to Ryan Heath's Anatomy of a League Winner article over on Fantasy Points, you can see in terms of league winners over the last 2 years, across the board, wide receiver, you're going to get some, right? 10% hit right there, but you get 20% for running back and then 75% for quarterback. I find myself gravitating towards Lamar, Josh Allen, those archetypes. And then also, I don't mind, if a Chase Brown gets back to you, if Bucky Irving gets back to you, if Amarian Hampton finds himself in the third round, or you can just go with Jaden Daniels or Jalen Hurts in that range and feel very good about that. But if I was going to take a swing on one of these wide receivers, I'm not saying the vibes are good, because the vibes are certainly not good around Tyreek Hill, and it is a maximum boom bust pick. I have him as like a middle of the third round pick that's really tough to stomach, but if one of these guys was going to hit 20-plus points per game, it would be Tyreek Hill. Again, the vibes aren't good. Oblique injury. You still have like Tua and Mike McDaniel having weird vibes towards him because he was so public last year and kind of his distaste for what the Dolphins were doing and kind of wanted to force his way out. There's trade rumors, and if he gets traded, that's going to really make things muddy. But if he plays for the Dolphins the entire year, if Tua stays healthy, it wouldn't be shocking. We've seen him hit 20-plus points per game and 3-plus yards per out run as recent as 2023. He's only, and I say only, but he's in his 9th year of his career, so it wouldn't be outrageous for him to still have a 20-plus point per game season in the tank. I'm saying there's a chance. I'm not saying that he's like this huge target for me in drafts, but if you find yourself wanting to swing on maximum upside in the third round, I do think Tyreek Hill would be your most likely candidate to hit 20-plus points per game. And it wouldn't shock me if we looked back and was like, man, Tyreek Hill at the 304 was a huge steal and was kind of one of these guys that decided fantasy football in 2025, or he could be somebody that literally sinks teams. Now, I haven't talked about Devontae Adams. He, to me, again, profiles as a guy similar to a T. Higgins or Devontae Smith. I don't see him unseating Puka Nacua, but Puka hasn't always been healthy in his career. If Puka was to go down, Devontae could crush. Really, again, the only thing he doesn't hit is the opportunities per game because of Puka. And then also, he's in his 12th year of his career, which isn't crazy. We've seen guys in year 11. That was Keenan Allen in 2023. So he gets a yellow there. So Devontae Adams isn't a bad pick in the third, but you kind of have to lower him due to age. And then also Matthew Stafford downside. But he does have the upside where he's kind of a handcuff in a way, where if Puka was to go down, Devontae Adams would have 20-plus point per game upside in this offense. Then we get to round 4. And to me, this is a fine range for wide receiver. This is a great time to take wide receivers here. You should understand as well, you don't need 20-plus point per game upside in the 4th round, right? 20-plus point per game upside to me is just justification for taking a wide receiver in the first 2 rounds. After that, it's just a cherry on top of upside. I will say the one guy who stuck out was DK Metcalf as a pretty brutal pick. He hasn't really been all that good in either of the last 2 years, maxing out at 14 points per game. The offense is ranked 26th in terms of scoring. They're not going to pass the ball a ton, so I have a tough time drafting DK Metcalf in the 4th round. Same with Marvin Harrison. I just don't think that his skill set matches up all that well with Kyler Murray. 1.63 yards per out run last year. I don't think he has a huge ceiling, but in the 4th round, maybe he's fine, right? Maybe he gives like a 16, 17 point per game season on the high end. But the 2 guys that stuck out to me as targets here, the first one being Rashee Rice. And this is actually a great time to talk about Rashee Rice because as I'm recording this video today, Rashee Rice now has his hearing on track for September 30th, meaning he's going to play his first 4 games, have his hearing, and then get his suspension, meaning he's likely going to play the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season and then get suspended the next 4 to 6 weeks and then be back for the fantasy playoffs. And that makes him a really, really weird pick. What I will say is I'm not drafting him in the 4th round, but I do think all of these sites, right, I'm using consensus ADP, I think they're going to drop him down to like the 5th, 6th round. And at that point, I am drafting him because he is a very clear candidate to hit 20-plus points per game when he's on the field. Last year, small sample, but in the first 3 weeks when he was healthy, he hit 20-plus points per game. He's on a great scoring offense. He's hit 16-plus points per game in the past. He's hit 3-plus yards per out run in the past. It's really easy to see how he becomes an absolute smash. And the way that I would justify it is if you can get in the 5th, 6th round a wide receiver option with a like 15, 16 point per game projection and like a 20-plus point per game ceiling, you can get him for cheap, have a really strong start where maybe he's on your team and you're all of a sudden you're 4-0 or you're 3-1. It's going to sting when he's off to the side, but there is, you are gambling here. But in fantasy football, I say this all the time, only 1 out of 12 people in your league are going to win. You kind of have to roll the dice here. So if you roll the dice on Rashee Rice, there's a chance he gets suspended like 2 games or 3 games. There's a chance he gets suspended 4 through 6. That's kind of the gamble you're taking here. And then by the time he's done with that, maybe he's back on your team week 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and he's helping you make that push into the fantasy playoffs. And to me, that's a very valuable thing, right? It sucks that he's not going to be able to provide depth when your team is going through injury issues and by-Mageddon weeks. But again, that strong start and then also coming back for the playoff weeks, I think is enticing enough that once you get into the 5th, 6th, 7th round and you're drafting flex options, to me, he's a fine wide receiver 3 to draft off the board. And then we'll also talk about Terry McLaurin. It's crazy to say, but if you squint, there's some upside here, right? He hits in his first 11 years. He's actually in that sweet spot of year 3 through 8. He hasn't hit 16-plus points per game in either of his last 2 years, but 15.8 is right there. 10-plus opportunities per game. He doesn't hit, but he's on a top 6 scoring offense according to Vegas. Top 30 wide receiver by ADP. He doesn't hit 2-plus yards per run in either of his last 2 seasons, but 1.98 is right there. And then again, he's on a top scoring offense. And if you squint even harder, he starts to look a little bit like Jamar Chase last year, who sat out prior to torching the league for 20-plus points per game. I understand that it feels a little risky with McLaurin because he's sitting out. There's a contract dispute, but he is right here, and it would make sense. I know he got really lucky in terms of touchdowns last year, and I've called him somebody that I'm fading. I'm fading him in the 3rd round of home leagues. If he's a 4th round pick in your home league, I don't mind Terry McLaurin. He is falling because of this contract holdout, and if you can scoop up some value on Terry, I do think it makes a ton of sense in the 4th round, especially if you can go like Jaden Daniels to McLaurin. It wouldn't shock me if he kind of did better in year 2 with Daniels, right? If Daniels takes a step forward, if their kind of connection is better in their 2nd year together, it wouldn't shock me if McLaurin had a monster year. And we didn't touch on Mike Evans, but Mike Evans also, I mean, he's always a threat to score, 13 touchdowns and go for 1,200 yards. So he's somebody as well. I won't put in Green as like a true target, but he's somebody where if he hit 20-plus points per game one last time at, age 33 or whatever, it would not shock me. Now, I will say before we get into the 5th round, all of these guys we're talking about in this video, even Terry McLaurin, who I used to not really be a huge fan of, I'm starting to move these guys up my rankings. Some of these guys are targets as well. And if you want to make sure data like this is involved in your draft plan, make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I'll have links to that in the description. Pinned at the comment section down below as well, and you can get my top 200 rankings cheat sheet where you can check off player by player. They're tiered. I have my target rounds for every single player, and they will be updated for research like this, for stuff like the Rashee Rice suspension, for stuff like the Quinshon Judkins getting kind of his case tossed out by court or whatever. There's a lot of moving parts right now. My rankings will be up to date and good to go for your drafts. I use them in my own drafts that I stream here every night on the channel. Make sure you check it out. Patreon.com/Ron Stewart. Let's talk about round 5. Again, this is the part of the draft where you don't need 20-plus points per game. But if we were going to get like a magical Debo year or magical Cooper Kupp year or one of these years, Stephon Diggs in 2020, this is the lens you want to be looking through. Now, I will say, before we talk about Zay Flowers, who I have circled here or squared, DJ Moore looks okay. I will say I'm still not really high on DJ Moore. I still do think Rome Odunze is going to kind of pass him on the depth chart here at some point. I do think that DJ Moore, he's not long for this team, but it wouldn't shock me if we did look up, right? He had that year in 2023 with 16-plus points per game, 2-plus yards per out run. If this Chicago Bears offense is actually good, and DJ Moore can get touches out of the backfield on top of targets to get to 10-plus opportunities per game, there are some things here with DJ Moore. So I'm going to move him up a little bit. I have him in a spot where I'm not drafting him at all. I think I'm going to move him up a nudge here. I will say as well, Xavier Worthy's appealing. He's at 5. I still like Xavier Worthy, but I will say I think 20-plus points per game is a stretch. I think that he's someone that's going to jump into the 15, 16 point per game range. And then if he ever does that, 20 plus is probably in the future. 1.24 yards per run. It would just be unprecedented for him to, out of nowhere, make the leap to 20 plus points per game. But if he was going to, he did have a 7-game stretch through the Super Bowl where he did have 2+ yards per out run. You can also squint and see Jameson Williams. If you think J-Mo can maybe pass Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Amon-Ra St. Brown had a knee procedure in the offseason, if Amon-Ra St. Brown has any sort of complications with that, maybe Jameson Williams can take that next step, but I would be shocked in year 4 where his previous 2-year career high is 14.2 points per game. That would be pretty out of nowhere. But to me, and so many people didn't like when I talked about on the breakout wide receivers video, is Zay Flowers, man. He's in his first 3 years. Year 3 is where that sweet spot starts. He hasn't hit 16-plus points per game yet, but again, he's in year 3, so we can project him forward. He's not projected for 10-plus opportunities per game, but he is in a top 6 scoring offense. He's hit 2+ yards per out run in each of his last 2 seasons, and then he's also in a top 15 scoring offense. So the volume might not be there, but this is the kind of archetype we want to target. If you're not going to have the volume, you need to be in a good offense. That gives you efficiency, that gives you touchdown upside, and then Zay Flowers also has the ability in year 3 to take a step forward and be a real premier wide receiver in this league, and I do think that that's in the cards for him. This is somebody that absolutely crushed reception perception when you look at Matt Harmon's wide receiver route chart here, where he had, in terms of press, man, and zone, 70th percentile win rate versus man, 89th percentile win rate versus zone, 65th percentile versus press. He can win against all coverages. He can win on all routes. I do think that a breakout Zay Flowers season wouldn't be shocking. Isaiah Likely banged up, could maybe open some things up for Zay Flowers here. I know they have Mark Andrews. I know they have Derrick Henry. I know Rashad Bateman's there. But if Zay Flowers put it all together this year in year 3, had a monster breakout, it would not shock me at all for Zay Flowers to be somebody that wins leagues in 2025. But that is going to do it for us today. That is the entirety of all the data I have. Every 20-plus point per game season since 2014. These videos are very fun where we look back and kind of do some data digging. But I will say, again, it is a little bit of bro science and doing checklists. Like, this is not by any means definitive. I just think it's a good lens to look through. Last year, we actually did. It's tough to give yourself a pat on the back, but we did identify Jamar Chase, which isn't really a massive W. He was already a first-round pick, but we did identify him in last year's video along with Puka Nacua, who's the wide receiver 2 in points per game. But I think that this is going to be interesting to look back on. And I do also think these mid-round targets are going to be guys you want to be drafting. So as always, if you want my rankings, make sure you check them out, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I'll have links to that in the description and the comment section down below. But if you can't support there, all I ask is that with all the time we put into these videos, I'm trying to do 6 videos a week. I don't think I've ever done that in my life, but I think that we're going to be able to keep up this pace. So I think we're going to do 6 videos a week. Check out the streams every night as well. And then leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new. I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, oh, oh.